once again, it is my privilege and pleasure to come and spend these few moments of your time. It seems at this time as if there are, shall we call them, gathering clouds of challenges that are appearing on the horizon as the shifting consciousness begins to adapt itself to the changing circumstances. I want to say the challenges are, of course, opportunities. And it is when one begins to notice that it is one's mind that is making it into a negative framework. The time then is first of all to understand the nature of the programming one applies to one's thought processes. And of course, as we have talked before about the addictions one has in, shall we say, historical terms. In other words, one always wants to keep the old because one is understands it. One has always had the ability to manage what one knows, and the new is not in that category. Enough for us to begin a conversation.
Thank you, and thank you for being here with us again today. Following from your introduction, I'm curious to know if through the shift in consciousness and the changing dynamics that we experience, is the way that we manage our thought process or our programming changing in this time?
Shall we say one has to change it because the evidence becomes clearer and clearer that one is simply manufacturing one's experience. One is making it up in line with those thoughts and the patterns of one's own past, shall we say. This is often the category that is referred to as karma, old thoughts manufacturing similar experiences. One then meets oneself, as we have always said, as, shall we say, the occult teachers have always hinted, each soul meets self. And it is an important distinction to understand what is meant by the soul and the self in these terms. One begins to understand the nature of creativity. And it is certain then that one begins to understand the nature of God's the creator. And so it is when one gives one's power, one's thoughts to a God, then you will experience the creations of such a God. If one, of course, begins to take responsibility, then one experiences the creations of one's self.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned at the beginning that the challenges are opportunities, but we are discovering our negative framework or our negative mindset or our negative programming. Is there any practical guidance that you can give us of how we can get out of our negative programming?
Shall we say, always identify what one is creating. In other words, the spiritual, shall we say, method has always been to listen to one's thoughts. First of all, listen to the ravings of the mind. I put it that way. The ravings of the mind, and then stop them. Simply put them to one side, recognize they are madness. Unless they are creative, unless they provide you with a new lease of life, they are the ravings of madness. Do you understand how much madness there is in the world and how much it is passed on, how much it is spent in terms of its viral capacity to spread nonsense? Do you understand? And so much is negative. What about the positive? What about the opportunities that are presented? I want to say this because there has been such a negative thoughts about, shall we say, the technology and particularly the electrical frameworks. Everything runs on frequency. Everything, shall we say, is a polar framework. That is, it is magnetic and electrical. So how are you going to escape your frequencies? Are you going to assert that lower frequencies impact higher frequencies? That is an important consideration. Do you understand what I mean? The higher frequencies are beyond the framework. The lower frequencies, of course, are harmonics of the higher. So they will be affected, not the other way round. You understand how this is important in the new scheme. How, shall we say, as consciousness recognizes the impact and power of frequencies and, shall we call them the quad and disquad that is possible. So then it is often considered that sound and singing and so forth is uplifting, of course, because it holds within it the framework of higher frequencies, particularly those that are held by the practitioner. Someone singing, shall we say, songs of upliftment will, of course, cause upliftment in the listener. You follow what I mean? And therein is the opportunity to shift what you listen to. Does that make some sort of sense?
It does, thank you. Now I'd like to change the topic, if I may. There's a couple of things I'd like to talk about this week in terms of hot topics in the Western world's media. Firstly, it feels like the entire world's media has been focusing on and talking about Johnny Depp in the Amber Heard defamation trial. Is there a higher perspective that you can give us on this?
Shall we say the propaganda media wants to keep attention away from things. And so it puts something onto it that attracts what we will call the monkey mind. And everyone wants to hear what is going to happen. Who is at fault? Of course, it is what you call a charade.
What, sorry?
A charade.
A charade, oh yes. Yeah.
You understand it is put there to occupy the, shall we call it, the social room, away from all of the other things that are out of control of those in power. Shall we suggest, for example, that what you call the debt ceiling is simply no longer viable. So it has been taken off the table, as it were, for being discussed. So then you have other mechanisms in order to try, shall we say, to hold on to the old world that is collapsing around you. No one is going to dispute that. You understand? And if people are waking up, then you must find a panacea to put them back to sleep. So that other things can be tested. The idea is there's got to be a solution in which the old can retain its controls. But of course, it is more of the madness because the system is changed. The God has changed. And the old gods are attempting to hold on, as has been the case in the past.
Are you referring to gods as religion, or are you referring to gods as power?
Shall we say both? Religion is power. Gods hold power over those. If one wakes up, one becomes a god in one's own right. And then what happens to the gods? Do you understand? Then they hold no more attraction, and the system that is supporting this is no longer valid. You understand? Nothing can be done to stop it, because the shift in consciousness has happened and the new species has arrived. You understand? Nothing can stop this. And of course, all of the failings of the past will dissipate as the new order takes its place.
So my next question is around the most recent mass shooting in the US, this time Robb Elementary School in Uvalde. And obviously it sparked a number of discussions around gun violence, especially in the States, and gun laws. Can you give us any insight into this, shed any light, please?
This madness is not part of the laws of the land. It is a mechanism used to continue the control of the population. You understand? It also will follow it. More and more people are waking up to how insane it is. And around the world, more and more countries are understanding this power as it is failing. And in doing so, it also is holding on to its old mechanisms, but it cannot survive. Do you understand? The old system will not survive, but it will take more and more madness for it to change enough. One understands there are angry people because they are not listened to and they have no alternative to get, shall we say, to get noticed, to be heard. And this is a mechanism that works extremely well. You understand? And so until you listen, until the madness is analyzed, until the madness is brought to an end, you will have more and more madness. You understand? It is an insanity that spreads, as I have pointed out. Notice where the madness starts. There is only one country that is entirely insane. You understand what I mean? And if anybody were to take that for granted, shall we say, just look. Everybody in the world is putting their chips, as it were, to gamble with the, shall we say, the highest bidder. But remember, in the casino, the house always wins, not straight away, of course, but the house always loves the highest bidder. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So anyone with any sense will avoid being caught up with such a gambler, such an addicted gambler at that.
Thank you. Now, finally, for quite a big question today, I'm curious to know how humans started. Did we start from a single cell, or were we descendants from apes? What is the real truth about how the first single cell began?
Shall we say this? Manifestation moves, shall we say, downward from a higher form into a condensation. First of all, there is unity, a single framework that is unified in the wider context. One says, this is the realm of the gods. Of course, the God becomes more individualized into different frameworks, different gods taking on different qualities, different purposes, different responsibilities. And so that descends into another framework, shall we say, of the individual motivation. And at this point, it begins to hold, shall we say, conceptual ideas. Each one of such conceptual ideas manifests in terms of, shall we say, frameworks of existence. That is, first of all, before you build the building, draw up the concept, the architect, and shall we call them the planner, creates the drawing of the building in its environment, in context. And so that imaginary form begins to take shape. Next, you give it to the drawing person who puts measurements on the framework, begins to make it more, shall we say, real in practical terms. That is, first, the individual imagination begins to take shape. And individual manifestations and shapes begin to interact with one another. One takes on, shall we say, an identity. Identities interact and cause, shall we say, agreements to take shape, and you begin to manufacture a three-dimensional solid world. That is, still it is not solid, but it interacts and sets a framework in which one can operate. Do you understand? Even as it is, there is no dimension of history, no time, as it were. This is the first quality of, shall we say, a creative mind. As it begins to descend yet again, the interactions take form in terms of, shall we call them, shapes and interactions and sensates. That is, one rubs up against one's friends and foe, as it were, those that are in agreement and those that would want to change your particular style. And so that is a more solid form, often called the astral body. Solid and operating within a set framework. One is not then delving into the imaginary, but one is interacting with what is sensory. And so it moves down as consciousness settles into a physicality. Under the circumstances, the physicality begins to solidify into terms, shall we say, of solid substance. However, the solid substance, in order to remain, shall we say, consistent, has to have an element of time. That is, it stretches into the future and as such must have stretched into the past. So now you have a future and a past, and one has then, shall we say, to identify the length of time of a incarnation that is into solid form before one returns to a higher aspect to, shall we say, contemplate the experiences and what one has accumulated in terms of knowledge. Do you follow what I mean? Then one has to have a past from which one imagines. So then one has to create the ideas of, shall we say, continuity. Continuity requires birth and death. Birth then requires a mechanism. Then you have a mechanism, and so on and so forth, all the way back in time, making sure, of course, that one's knowledge is getting less and less and less over time frames into the past. Eventually, of course, you have created a history all the way back as far as you can, and then you begin to make assumptions in terms of the animal kingdom and so forth and so on, and it is all the product of an imagination. Do you understand? Whether, of course, you are the result of an imagination of some future. Do you understand what I mean? Some future original descendant all the way back. So your history is simply the fleshing out of knowledge in a mechanism, in a way that brings consistency and coordination and contingency to the entire experience of, shall we say, a God's descent into solid form. This is not then that one simply emerged from a beginning, but rather one descended from, shall we call it a future, a way back, in order to build a sensible operating procedure. This is the soul meeting self, all the way back into the distance. Do you understand? It is not as if solid anything, but it is apparent solid form. That is important in order to recognize that the solid nature must have, shall we call it, continuity or patterns. So human beings, humankind has recognized patterns from, shall we say, from the beginning of time. And then as new knowledge appears, shall we say, the old is systematically modified in order to answer the new information. So, shall we say, is the past stable? Of course not. It is constantly being updated, just like your computer system, constantly updating the old in order to serve the present moment.
Interesting. Thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to add today?
Always we should leave enough for future discussions. There are more and more questions as one assimilates new information, new considerations. I want to put a line under what I am saying as information. It is not information at all. One has to assimilate what is being discussed in order to decide how one wishes to take this discussion. Enough?
Yes, thank you very much.
Then once again, thank you for your time and sitting there to contemplate all that is being offered. Then once again, thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you.